Hello and welcome to Inside Iraq. I'm Jassim Azzawi. The murder of Sardasht Uthman, a young aspiring journalist, has shocked Iraq and Kurdistan. Sardasht has predicted his own early death because of few articles he had written. In his brilliant and widely read pieces, he tackled corruption in the Kurdistan regional government, dared to mention President Masoud Barzani and his daughter, and lamented the death of freedom in Kurdistan. Mass demonstrations followed, and accusing fingers have been pointed at the KRG's intelligence services. But if no one can prove the murder, will Sardasht killers escape justice? To discuss the murder and surrounding circumstances of Sardasht Uthman, I am joined from London by Hiwa Uthman, Iraq Country Director at the Institute for War and Peace Reporting, and a former media advisor to Iraqi President Jalal Talbani, and by Hossein Mahmoud, the representative of women's freedom in Iraq. Welcome to Inside Iraq. Hossein, let us go to the very heart of the issue, and let me ask you a very simple question. Who and why Sardasht Uthman was killed?
Well, as you mentioned earlier on in the program as well, Sardasht Uthman was killed because of his articles that he wrote lately criticizing the corrupt rulers in Kurdistan, particularly his sharp political criticism targeted Masoud Barzani and his tribe, basically, for corruption, for political violence, and so on and so forth. And why this is the reason, really, I mean, why he was killed, because of his honesty, because of his bravery, and that because traditionally speaking, Barzani family do not allow anybody to criticize them. I mean, I'm not here solely to accuse Masoud Barzani of carrying this out, but the majority of people who took to the streets and who are protesting to this day and they want justice for Sardasht, that's what they believe, that you know, the KRG headed by Masoud Barzani carried out this you know, assassination and kidnapping, and the kind of kidnapping and the ways in which he was kidnapped and killed.
I shall come to that later on, Hossein, but meanwhile let me engage Hiwa. He is not the first to be killed, but in comparison with the rest of Iraq, where more than 200 people died and killed for a variety of reasons, Sardasht is the third journalist to be killed in Iraq. And let us say from the very top, the measure and the space for freedom in Kurdistan far outweighs what is going on in the rest of Iraq. And yet, having said that, having given the benefit to the KRG, explain to me, as well as answer Hossein, why do you think Sardasht was killed?
Well, really, we have to first of all wait for the outcome of the investigation. It has taken much longer than it should do. No information has been provided yet as to why and how this guy was killed. The key issue here is not to predict what's happening or base our analysis or our discussion on basically on facts that we may think that they are facts, but we'll be basing our arguments on foundations that preempt the outcome of any investigation into the murder. It is if the case is if Sardasht was killed because of what he wrote, and this is the widespread belief, it is a very serious breach of freedom of expression. It is a murder that should definitely not go unpunished without bringing the murderers.
Indeed, that is the hope of
justice.
the people, not only in Kurdistan but the rest of the Iraq, that the murder of Sardasht, as well as the murder of other Iraqi journalists, will not go unpunished. But you mentioned the reason why and how. Let us just explain to our viewers the how, because enough information has trickled that this young man in his last year at Salah ad-Din University, he was just about to graduate with perfect English, an excellent writer. He was grabbed at the door of the university with 3 or 4 people. He was hauled into a car and then he disappeared for 2-3 days. His body was found in Mosul with 2 bullets, according to some of the reports, in his mouth. Perhaps there is a message there that those who open their mouths, they will be killed. Hossein, I know you are in communication with his family. Can you tell us what is the latest? What do they tell you?
Well, basically, the family would want justice for Sardasht, basically, and the latest report is that it was published by the investigation committee, which was formed by the KRG itself. It's proved to be very biased, and actually it seems like they haven't done much. What they try to say is that the bullets were not shot into his mouth. Actually, they say that it was only one bullet shot into his head, and that he was not tortured, whereas there are clear evidence, and his family are very well aware, being the first people to see the body, that Sardasht was tortured very badly and that the bullets were shot into his mouth. There is a political message in that. This is basically not only two bullets shot into somebody's mouth. This is a message, a political message, that whoever have the courage and guts to criticize this regime, to criticize the Kurdish rulers, this will be their fate. That's what I believe, basically.
Well, I think the key issue here is to exactly wait for the investigation. We know it's taken much longer than what it should. The report this morning, I contacted some people in Erbil, some of our journalists, who went and contacted the sources within the investigation committee, and they said the opposite. They said, even one of our reporters said that he saw the report, the medical report himself. They even went to Mosul, some of them, and said that he was not killed in his, he was not shot in his mouth. Anyway, whether he was shot in his mouth or in his head, it is a murder. At the end of the day, he died. The key issue here is Sardasht. Who caused the killing of Sardasht? Sardasht was killed.
Well, let us quote Sardasht himself here. He knew exactly that he was dead the moment he wrote his first article. In his second article, he predicted his death, and he said, I'm waiting for my killers to come and get me, simply because he touched the sacrosanct. He touched the unmentionable. He touched on the Peshmerga, he touched on the corruption, and he touched on President Masoud Barzani and his daughter. In one of his articles, he was fantasizing about marrying Masoud Barzani's daughter. And from an Iraqi point of view, from a Kurdish point of view, from a tribal point of view, that's not the sort of things you write about. Did he cross the Rubicon?
Well, it's a shame that a representative of the KRG or the Barzani family or tribe is not present on the show to defend themselves on this. As everyone on this show is almost suggesting that it is because of what he wrote he has been killed. I think it would only be fair to give them a chance to say that they have or they haven't.
In that case, let me just share with you, Hiwa, and share with our audience. We went out of our way to approach almost every single officials that they have appeared on this show, and they told us point blank, you will not find a single person willing and capable or will be allowed to appear on this show. So that's why I'm very grateful to you, Hiwa Uthman, that you are appearing and articulating and perhaps explaining the position. But let me go back to... Go ahead, Hiwa, go ahead.
I'm not their spokesperson to explain
their
position,
you are not.
to be honest.
Indeed, you are not.
My role here is to provide analysis and to provide context of why is this murder taking place, why has Sardasht Uthman opted to go down this route that he saw as good journalism, and why what the case of Sardasht Uthman really is part of a much bigger phenomena that we see in the Middle East in general and in Iraq in particular. Most young journalists and reporters try to opt for the opinion pages before they get the craft or the skills of journalism, be it reporting,
that doesn't
be it writing,
merit murder, Hiwa.
or information gathering. Sorry?
That does not merit murder. That does not merit somebody. He overshot himself. He's only 24 years old, and perhaps he thought he's brave and he is in command of the language, and he fantasized about hopefully one day he will marry the daughter of Masoud Barzani. That is pretty much the maximum he said.
Absolutely, it doesn't merit murder, but at the same time we should be careful that not to turn the Sardasht case into a situation whereby a lot of bad journalists. Sardasht is a victim of everybody really in Iraqi Kurdistan. He's a victim of the government, the opposition, and the unprofessional media scene that we have.
Frankly speaking, Hiwa Uthman, I don't understand whether this is this is a friendly advice, or this is a warning, Hosanna? You heard Hiwa. He's saying that in one way or another, and I'm not paraphrasing him, he brought it on himself.
Yes.
No,
well, I don't agree with that, basically. I don't agree with that, basically. I mean, this has been something that is said by unfortunately, senior officials in the both PUK and KDP parties. They said, well, he should have not crossed the red line so that he basically come across this fate. I don't agree with that. And I think people should have absolute freedom to write and to criticize and to bring about and basically expose the corruption and the political violence that is going on. I mean, I don't agree with Hiwa saying that bad journalism or a few bad journalists. This is not the case of bad journalists and good journalists. This is the case of political freedom and freedom of expression. For the last 18 or 19 years of the KRG establishment in Iraqi Kurdistan, they have been oppressing their political opponents. They have been killing and torturing and kidnapping people who have opposed them. And that the case of Sərdaş Osman became a really important case in the struggle of people for freedom. Why thousands of Kurdish people, both inside Iraq, Iraqi Kurdistan and abroad, came to the streets holding the banners calling for freedom, freedom of political activism and freedom of expression, because we lack that. Under this corrupt Kurdish rule, we lack all kinds of freedoms, basically.
I think the case of Serdesht was heavily politicized between the opposition and the government, the ruling parties. The minute the news came out, instead of finding out exactly why did this happen, instead of looking at ways of preventing this from happening again, instead of tackling it from a purely professional security, legal aspect, it was immediately the crisis was managed by the politicians. Even the security services started producing political statements, but which is something that they shouldn't. The opposition immediately jumped on this occasion in order to put the people on the streets. The minute it escalated into a political confrontation between the KDP and namely the Goran group in the opposition, everybody who had a grudge against the KRG used the case of Sərdaş Osman in order to get back at the KRG, to say that these guys
perhaps
are corrupt,
for the following reason that mentioned earlier by Hozan, and that is for the past 18 years, I'm just quoting her directly what she said. There has been intimidation, there has been murder, and there is no accountability. That's what she said. Go ahead, Hozan. This is your chance.
Definitely. Yes, Jassim. The case of Sərdaş Osman is not being used. The case of Sərdaş Osman is basically the momentum of the people's anger and revolt against the Kurdish corrupt rulers. I mean, thousands of people. It's not only about Goran, the opposition, or other political parties or groups who are in opposition to KRG. This is about ordinary civilians who are living in dire poverty, who are living without jobs, without proper education, without proper health system, without basically, proper basic rights and basic human rights in Iraqi Kurdistan. That's why people, you can tell, the majority of ordinary Kurdish people came to the street because Sərdaş Osman represented their aspirations, represented their desire for rights and freedoms and better life. Sərdaş lived in poverty. Sərdaş lived in poverty. That's why, he could represent the aspiration of people so well.
Can I just say one thing here? The ordinary people of Kurdistan, let's not forget, just under a year ago, 70 to 80% of them went out and voted for the existing ruling regime with its opposition, okay? A few months ago, they went out and voted in another election for lists that represented the same ruling parties. So it is, I think, really taken out of proportion.
Since you mentioned Goran and since you mentioned the election, the murdered gentleman, he was also a member of Goran. He voted for them. He rallied the troops and he went out of his way in order to effect that change through the ballot boxes. Unfortunately, he ended up with a bullet in his head.
Again, I mean that he didn't get killed because he was in the Goran movement. That I can assure you.
Indeed not.
Because there are so many other people who were in the Goran movement.
We should also consider the amount of all these elections in Kurdistan, when you say 70% of Kurdish people voted for this, current establishment, I really don't think this is a very representative figure. I mean, we all know the kind of fraud and the kind of, tricks that they are using to forge, people's votes and so on and so forth. It is very clear. I mean, people have, if you are, for example, working for them, and if you don't vote for them, then the next day you lose your job. The next day you can't have, income coming in, and you have children and you have family. Hiwa, we should not forget one thing, that people under this current regime in Iraqi Kurdistan are really suffering, and then they really don't have much choice left for them, because this too, Iraqi Kurdistan is divided between two families, Barzani family and Talabani family, and they are actually almost owning everything in Iraqi Kurdistan. Just a couple of days ago, a report came out. Masoud Barzani's salary is $400,000 a month. What do you call this?
But let me go back to Sardasht Uthman, because he is our subject. In his article number 2, if I am not mistaken, he says that he went to the president of the university, Salahuddin University, and he told him, Mr. President, I have received calls and I have received text messages that my life is just about to end. They are going to kill me. What can you do for me? And the president said, there is absolutely nothing I can do for you. These calls, maybe they are coming from overseas. The gist of this statement, he knew that article number 1 pretty much has buried him.
Well, I think, afterwards the president of the university denied that he was contacted by Sardasht. Again, we really should ask him why was he, if he really contacted him or not. He said that he didn't contact me. And
he also went to one of the one of the security officers, to one of the, what we call a brigadier general, to Amid, and he told him, my life is just about to end and I'm just going to wait. And the man belongs to a family known for freedom fighting. His father was a Peshmerga. His father fought with Mullah Mustafa Barzani, the Iraqi government. So this is somebody who's not trying to topple the government. He's just looking for some change.
Jassim, I find this rather interesting. There are without really getting into becoming the investigators here, or the judge or the investigator in this case.
Our job is to ask the tough questions, Hiwa.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we should really ask ourselves, why was this guy murdered? And why was it?
Let me reverse the question again, and go ahead, you answer it. You ask the question, go ahead, you answer it. Why was he murdered?
This guy was murdered because he operated in an unhealthy environment, be it the government, the media, and the opposition. This guy was utilized by almost all. His killing afterwards was utilized by the opposition.
Are you saying the opposition killed him, or the media killed him, or are you saying the government killed him? Because you mentioned those 3 items.
I'm saying all 3 are responsible in one way or another for his death. And all 3 should, instead of shouting at each other in the wake of the murder,
Huzan is shifting in her seat. She wants to jump in. Go ahead, Huzan.
2 years ago, Soran Mahama, who is another young journalist who was based in Kirkuk, he was killed, just shot dead, simply because he wrote articles criticizing Barzani and his family and the corruption. Now, 2 years later, we see Sardasht being killed in a very similar manner. And the case of Sardasht was, he already predicted his own killing, and why and how and who are going to kill him. He already reported, as you said, to the security, to the president of the university. But why nobody did anything to protect him? In the most safest city in Iraq, which is Erbil, the capital of Kurdistan, a young person get kidnapped and killed and taken all the way through checkpoints to Mosul and killed there. This is a very clear case. We do not need
this begs the question, Hozan, regarding
about who did it.
Regarding the other 2 journalists, what did the investigation show, and have any charges been lobbed against them?
Not really. For the last 2 years, Soran Mamahama, and who was killed for criticizing Barzani family and the corrupt rule of Kurdish parties, for the last 2 years there has been no news of any investigations being carried out. His family are still searching for justice for their son. I mean, what
I am
can
encouraged.
we expect?
Hiwa is shaking his head in agreement with you. Go ahead, Hiwa. If nothing happened with Soran, why should we expect something different with Sardasht?
To start off with, Soran Mamahama was killed in Kirkuk through an investigation. The Kirkuk police authority should have produced the results of investigations, or they should have conducted the investigations. As far as I know, as far as we know, nothing of that has happened. On the issue of taking, just one point here I want to make. Everyone is saying that Sardasht was a very smart, young, intelligent guy who wrote about the dire situation of Iraqi Kurdistan, as Hozan and you, Jassim, are trying to prescribe it, despite the large influx of people from the rest of Iraq to Iraqi Kurdistan these days, seeking security and economic prosperity. That we should not discard. A key issue here, how could I, if I live in a corrupt and bad regime, how could I write about the president of this regime and then expect and go to the people who are below him seeking their protection? It is just not logical. I really do not understand how could this take place.
Since you asked the question, let me run it by Hozan. Was he mistaken? Was he under the notion that although he can write, but he will not be protected? Go ahead, Hozan. This is the last word for you.
Well, in his last farewell, he wrote that although he knew the head of security would do nothing for him, he still went ahead and did it. I mean, this is what anybody can do, really, even if you know, because that's the country you live in, that's the government and the authorities, they are responsible for your protection. I think Sardasht actually very well knew that he is going to be killed, and this is the way he is going to be killed. But he just did everything, and he put it in his last article, basically, which became his farewell. And he said that he went there and in his own heart he knew they're not going to do anything for him. So it's not that he wasn't smart, he was actually very smart. I think he knew what he was doing, and I think he have chosen this path to expose these miseries that his families and many more families like himself lived in it.
I have a last question to Hiwa. Uthman, wrap up this show for me. Hiwa, will we ever see the killers of Sardasht Uthman behind bars, even if they are higher up in the chain hierarchy of the KRG?
I really hope so, but the key question here should be that we should not see another Sardasht Uthman, and we should all work together, government, opposition and the media, in order to professionalize the standard of our work, to professionalize the security and protect the fundamental freedoms of the individuals who live in Iraqi Kurdistan. And the picture in Iraqi Kurdistan isn't as bleak as Hozan tries to put it, and it is not as good as the KRG tries to put it. The reality is somewhere in between. And the job of a good media is to show the reality. Unfortunately, in Iraqi Kurdistan today, you can never get the whole story from one source. The opposition newspapers are either, they portray the place as a completely disastrous situation, and the government shows the place as Switzerland. The reality is somewhere in between.
Hiwa Uthman, Hozan Mahmoud, thank you for being guests on Inside Iraq. To watch the show online, please visit our website, aljazeera.net/English. We have reached the end of this show. Join me next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Until then, this is Jassim Azzawi wishing you a fabulous week.